Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Okay. Yep. I guess we're talking in English, right? ¿Me escuchan? Perfecto, sí. I assume we're talking in English. We didn't discuss that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Yes. Minimal detail. Thank you so much for the film. Actually, before I start asking a question, I would like to basically mention I visited the house, must have been 2008, 2009, and 2010 with students. It's actually quite shocking to see it a few years later. At the time, Moriyama-San didn't speak any English at all, or pretended he didn't speak. The dog was alive, and he kept the dog with him all the time. I didn't ever see the dog on the floor, ever.
Like this.
Yeah, always carrying the dog with him. And then there were no architectural objects in the house, at least. Now I saw there was a picture of, I think it was a Niemeyer photo.
Yeah.
There was a Van Severen piece of furniture. There was a few pieces. But anyway, but we'll come to that later. So I'd like to start by making a little detour, longer question in relation to the exhibition that Smiljan has organized and is about to open tomorrow. So the exhibition basically brings together a number of objects, primarily representations, drawings, and among other things, from basically the 60s onwards to the 70s. And it's a time when in architecture, and I assume most of the audience is not architects, so I basically have to give a broader perspective. When architects basically start discussing buildings as process than as a product. In other words, when buildings grow and change owing to technological transformations, and therefore basically architecture starts to be broadened and discussed in different terms, and drawings and representations need to basically catch up to open up new ideas. As part of that process, basically, some architects in the late 60s also start being interested in the life of buildings as much as the buildings themselves. And they also see that basically we architects have a shortcoming in terms of how we represented buildings. Plans, sections, and elevations didn't allow us to show the life of a building, and we needed basically additional sets of documents. So from, say, the photomontage of the Smithsons, of Marilyn Monroe or John DiMaggio in one of the buildings in Golden Lane, to Bernard Shumi's screenplays and drawings of, in fact, scripts of dance and choreography in a number of drawings. There has been a tradition of architecture trying to basically discuss the way in which they instigate life and the way in which people basically undergo the living of those buildings, which is in fact your topic, so long detour. So for years, basically, architects started discussing film and basically the way in which film could also could allow us to broaden our field. So for years also, since architects didn't make films, I mean, some did, but as soon as they did, they moved elsewhere to a different field. We architects started to basically appropriate forms of representation that were coming from other fields and treat it as architecture. So we saw literature as architecture, we saw film as architecture, we saw performance art as architecture, we saw dance as architecture, because we needed productions in those fields to basically allow us to nourish our field. So Ziga Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera was architecture. Jean-Luc Godard's Two or Three Things That I Know About Her, which was also in the film, was for us architecture. Walter Ruttmann's Berlin Symphony of a City was architecture. Jules Dassin, The Naked City, which is also the title of a piece which is in the exhibition, I'm sure, was also architecture. Alain René's Hiroshima Mon Amour, that featured the Peace Memorial by Kenzo Tange, was architecture. Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up that featured the Economist building by the Smithsons was also architecture. And of course, Jean-Luc Godard, again, Le Mépris with Casa Malaparte by Adalberto Libera and Fritz Lang playing, directing a film on top of the roof was for us architecture. So basically we needed to appropriate these pieces as a way of broadening up our field. Years after, basically, your work came along. And from 2008 onwards, for about almost 20 years, you basically produced an extraordinary and very sort of enormous body of work that deals exactly with the subject, but that you work basically from the inside. Or that is, in fact, the first question. You are architects and filmmakers and artists, and so the first question, basically, we would, as architects, like to appropriate your work, and we have. In fact, I remembered, while preparing my questions today, that I quoted your first film on the Maison de Bordeaux in an article, basically as part of those examples where we architects basically think about the life of buildings, not only buildings themselves. But the first question is basically, would you say that the field within which you work is architecture, or would you rather define your work as one which plays in the interplay between a number of fields? Long question to frame.
Very good.
I asked Smiljan whether he wanted cultural or informal discussion, and basically cultural was his choice.
But first of all, thank you so much for this conversation. And I would like to thank Javiera and Seb and Smiljan for having us tonight. We are very excited. It's our first time in Chile, so it's a joy to be here. And I think you're right. We very much like to play or to work in this interplay of different disciplines. Let's say that we look at architecture through the medium cinema, of how cinema can help create a narrative for architecture. Let's say that I think the example you mentioned before on how, let's say, architecture appropriates some of main films of the cinema history is because they bring that richness of the narrative to look at space, and because tendentially I would say that architecture, the way it talks about itself, or it represents itself, is rather has dry tools of representation, which are very technical. And so I think the quality that cinema can bring to it is also to bring a certain breath of what, the narrative, the story can tell. What do you say about a space, rather than just defining it by its technical elements? And what I think this film very much brings into life is that now you all know, it's as if you were all able to spend a day or even a week with Mr. Moriyama in this house, whereas before coming here, maybe you already knew the building and the project through magazines and floor plans and pictures. But what this film brings is this element that was missing, is life, basically, is the quality of and the poetry of the everyday, which architecture hardly represents, actually. Because I would say it's rare that architects are also interested by that aspect, I would say. But it's interesting because in your question you made a sort of broad landscape of how architects are interested in these elements of representation, but I'm not sure today it's very much the case that the aspect of daily life very much appears in the way architecture represents itself. On the contrary, I think what we try to brought into the discussion from our first film, Color's House Life, is really to recenter the focus of architecture towards let's say, not only the needs, but also the question of the experience of space from the user's perspective, from the inhabitant, from life, basically. Because, yeah, most of the time that dimension, that perspective is very much not only hidden, but also forgotten.
Yeah. And when we made the first film, we started to talk with, because I studied architecture, Luis studied history of art, and we started talking about cinema and architecture, and I started to make some films alone, and I didn't want to make films about architecture, because for me, as an architect, was a kind of a failure about being an architect, making films for architects. So I say I will never make a film about architecture. And I think I never made a film about architecture, because since the beginning with Luis, we started to talk about what is a film about architecture, and immediately we switched from architecture to space. So we were very interested in architecture as a tool to create a space, but architecture create a space for people inside. A space without anyone inside that doesn't exist. You don't create as a monument, maybe, but even a monument, you see it from the outside. The inside of a monument is a very interesting topic, no? What is it? And so we started immediately to talk about what is space and how to film a space, how to represent a space, also how to better experience a space. And obviously we said that we need to see how people experience this space, and experience maybe the space with these people, and to share our experience of space. This film is, as all the films we made, even the film that you mentioned about the Colas house in Bordeaux, is this. We just spend a little time with people in a space, and we try to understand how they experience this space. Moriyama, for us, was a very important film, because we understood that there's a way to have a very, very deep and very strong experience with the space. If you are really sensible to the space, if you really pay attention, every moment, you can really have a very strong relationship with space. Otherwise, we don't have time to do it. No, normally in a normal daily life, we don't think about it. We just we cross the space. We go through space to go from one place to the other. But it's just a movement. We don't feel it. No, but our body is feeling this, because our body knows very well to recognize if you are in a good space or not. But we don't have time to think about this. So all the things we made from the first one, even until the last one, and this is in the middle, it's like this. We just try to understand how people very sensible to space, they pay attention and take the time to experience space. And and cinema is not the only way to do it. Is maybe one of the best way, but we try to do it with different things. We try also to do it with talking with the people, with the book we made, or some installation, everything we can do to understand how to improve our experience with the space, our relationship with space.
Right. I mean, I found it extraordinarily interesting, and I was not expecting it, that in the film you see really the Moriyama house becomes the frame. You don't really see the house, you see the performance of the house. In that respect, it sort of supports my expectation that it's truly architectural because you're interested in the life that the building instigates rather than the building itself. In fact, we do not see we cannot. I imagine people who haven't been there cannot reconstruct how the house is. It has anything but the sort of emphasis on constructing the pieces into a clear body of architecture.
That was very important since the very first film we made. We didn't want to do something that you normally find in a film about architecture is to have the whole idea of the architecture. You have to understand everything. You have to understand from the beginning how the architecture is, also the idea of the architects and the client, everything. You have to understand. You have to finish the film and say, now I know everything, so I don't even need any more to go there. From the beginning, we wanted to fragment to everything and don't have it a whole idea. Even a little bit at the end, as you have seen some shots at the end, you understand a little bit, but not really, because we wanted to cut this idea of understanding. It's not about understanding, it's about feeling. So you have to feel the moment we feel the moment, we feel the experience. And also when you go visit a building, you don't go out of the building say, okay, I have understood everything. No, you don't mind. You just, maybe you have a little moment of watching light or just a frame or a view like this, and you go out and you had a very strong experience, but you just remember 2, 3, 5 moments, no, and it's enough, and this is your experience of the space. But cinema normally is used by explaining everything. Mm-hmm. You have to explain everything to give a lot of information, a lot of images, so no doubt at the end, okay, it's done. So we want from the beginning, one of our point that we wanted to do, because when we talk about film architecture, immediately we said, okay, let's make a list of things what we don't want to have in a film like this. And so this is was one of the first to say, you have to finish the film and experience and to be confused even, no? But just because you have to pay attention to the feelings and not to the understanding.
Mm. Right. I'd probably like to come back to what you suggested. It's true that in my first question I suggested that architects are interested in life. Which is in fact not the case in general, let's say. I would say 10% of architects are interested in life, 90% are interested in stuff, or the object versus life. But in fact, those who are interested in life, or let's say the kind of life that a building might instigate, and I think this is one of the examples, though it took me 5 interviews with both Katsuya Sejima and Ryu Nishizawa to really sort of admit that they were interested in program as much as in form. So one of the questions is, in fact, whether one of the architects who is definitely interested in life more than things is Rem Koolhaas. And in fact, it was your first film. So to what extent the very house had an effect on your approach to what you wanted to portray in a film?
To what is it? The project, the house?
Yes. Because in fact, I think one of the interesting things is that, let's say, your selection of projects is extraordinarily precise in terms that it's, let's say, the house in Bordeaux and Moriyama House are 2 of the most studied and important houses of the past 25 years that basically we know extremely well whether we've seen them in person or not, because they are houses that promoted a different way of life than the traditional house. There are experiments in the way in which a building can basically suggest a life, and I think it's also the case of some of your other films that deal with an extraordinary selection. The Barbican, the Guggenheim in Bilbao, the B&B building by Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers, which is the prototype for the Pompidou, the decisive project by Auguste Perret in the use of concrete frame and so on.
I'll tell you, because initially when we started with the house in Bordeaux by Rem Koolhaas, we really wanted to shake a little bit, or to propose in a quite provocative way through the first film, to open up a debate about representation in architecture. So we needed to work on an architecture that was very iconic, because if you start working on a very unknown architecture, we wouldn't have a common background or common understanding of what we would propose as a shift or as a transformation in the way we look at. So that's why we really wanted to disrupt the approach or the image that was already installed in a collective memory. So that's why the very first films of a series we called Living Architectures were very precisely chosen to work at very iconic pieces of architecture that all of us have in our minds, in order to deconstruct these elements and to deconstruct this idea that Ila was telling about of approaching architecture in a visual totality. So that's why we also, in the editing of the films, we really worked in fragmenting spaces, fragmented functions. And the very first film, Colas House Life, has been, it's interesting because before Colas did the Biennale Elements, the film is constructed as pieces of elements. So you have the stairs, the curtain, all the house has been unbuilt or on like a Lego play, like we took out all the pieces to look at them in elements. And so there was this kind of narrative from a first film to another film of how we could propose alternative ways of looking at these masterpieces, always looking also, and that's why this kind of, for instance, Barbican, wow, I have a strong...
sound?
Yeah.
Do you hear a sound?
No, not anymore. Sometimes.
Just you don't hear. No?
I don't.
No,
Oh, yeah.
no. I was saying this. Just young people hear this sound.
Yeah.
You know that the frequencies, we lose frequencies with the
Aging.
Aging.
Sorry.
You don't hear. Huh? Yes, no. So if you don't hear these sounds, you're old. You're fucked up.
Sorry, I hear them. So the more we could work in experimental environments, the more we could also look at the answer of life, of how we inhabit, how we interact, how we appropriate these spaces, which are more interesting in a more challenging architecture, of course. And the Barbican was really interesting also to work in.
You still going, the sound?
No,
it's finished.
This is finished.
So, would you say that let's say, if we go back to the question of whether you're doing architecture, because in fact your answer was very much we're doing architecture, I would quite agree that yours is a contribution in terms of representation, or that at least, let's say, whether you want it or not, it's useful for us to discuss architecture. But the question is, would you say that you start by architecture and then on the way you find something else in the film? I mean, to me, it was actually quite interesting to see. I had seen Moriyama-San, I had seen the house, but now I saw a completely different dimension because I think he takes over the house. He becomes, the protagonist becomes more important than the house. The same as in Tokyo Ride. I was shocked by the appearance of Nishizawa as a larger-than-life character that takes you around Tokyo. So I imagine the starting point was, in fact, Moriyama House or Mr. Moriyama?
At the beginning?
Yeah.
It was we made this film by chance because I was alone in Tokyo and I had a tour with Nishizawa in a car that some years later became also the film. We made it again. But at the end of the day, he told me, now I want to show you a house. But also the owner of the house, that is a very interested man, that is a little bit strange. He told me that. I say, yes, let's go. And it was very funny because we arrived. It was raining. It was in the summer. It was super hot. In Japan, summer is super hot. Yeah. And we arrived, and it was raining very hard. And when we stopped with the car, he went inside. I have little things because I bought some pastries, I say some sweets for him. And so I arrived a little bit late, and I found this incredible scene. There was raining, and there was Nishizawa and Moriyama-San at the table on the outside in this little square where he lives, right, in between all the cubes. And I arrived with this sweets, and I ask, what are you doing? It's raining. And they stay all of the two of them. They were like this, waiting for me. They say, yeah, but we can. I don't know. It's raining too much. Can we go inside? No. Sit here. So I understand there was something strange. And so I say, we sit here. Yeah, sit. Okay.
Let's have the sweets.
Let's have the sweets. Sweet. So I took the sweets. I gave the sweets to Moriyama. Moriyama opened the sweet. It was not sweets. It was a pastry. How do you say? Delle paste. Yeah. Pasta. So with the cream and things like this. So he opened this and put it on the table, that it was floating. There was like this water on the table. So he put it on the table, and so obviously all the rain started to go on the these passages. They say, please. And so we found the three of us under the rain eating pastries completely full of water. It was so horrible. And this was the first meeting with Moriyama. And when we finished the pastries, it was still raining again. And we went inside. They say, "Oh, okay, let's take a tour of the house." And we took a tour of the house. And when we arrived on the basement, I saw all this wall of CDs of music. And just watching like this, because I like a lot of music, so I watched like this. I saw a series of CDs by Otomo Yoshide. Mm-hmm. That is one of my favorite Japanese musicians. And I say, Otomo Yoshide. And until that moment, Moriyama was very silent. He doesn't speak a lot, so he was very, very silent. But he heard that I knew Otomo Yoshide. It was a kind of revelation for him. I say, you know him? I said, yeah, I love Otomo Yoshide. Oh, Otomo Yoshide. And so he immediately he went, because the scene that you see in the film that was some days after, it wasn't the first CD, first record that he gave to me. The first one was, at that moment, he went and take one of the CDs like this and say, this is for you. I say, oh, thank you. No, why? And so he gave me a lot of CDs in a week like that. It was too much. So also the sake that we drink. I brought the sake because he was giving me all the CDs. And so at that moment, something happened between us, because I understood that through music we could talk with him. And at the end, when we went out, and with Nishizawa we went out of the house, we went home, I just asked him, do you think I can go tomorrow to see again Moriyama-san, just to stay with him a little bit like this? He said, I call you. I call him. He called and he said, Moriyama says, yes, he can. And so I went the morning after, and starting from that moment, I stayed for a week. Right. But it was really by chance. It doesn't. We didn't know that we took this film, and also I had a very little camera, so this film is made. I was quite surprised tonight because it was really one of the first. 10 years ago, it wasn't the first digital camera to make films. And it was really the beginning. And I made this film like...
He was supposed to do it afterwards, actually. Right. That's why I wasn't there. He was supposed to just have a look, but then he said, okay, this is the moment. As improvisation is important, right, as it's mentioned in the film, I think, and it explains a lot how we work in general. And if the moment sounds the right one, we should go.
But just to finish the story, the day after, I stayed with him, and at the end of the day, he said, if you want, you can even stay here, because I asked if he could film a little bit when the night was falling down. And he said, if you want, you can stay here for the night. I say, wow, could be fantastic. Thank you very much. So I accepted. And he told me, okay, you can sleep in my bedroom, no? And the bedroom is without mattress. So so you have to sleep on the floor. But it was so kind of him. So I said, thank you very much. And he went to sleep in the basement. So even worse, because the basement is concrete, it's not wood. And so I always say that the film finished when my back was so hurting too much, because after a week sleeping on the floor, for me it was really horrible.
Right. So let's stay in Japan. What would you say led from the Moriyama film to the Tokyo Ride film? I mean, Tokyo Ride is a film on Tokyo where you follow, or let's say you're taken by Ryo Nishizawa, the architect of the Moriyama house, and he takes you around Tokyo to basically see some of his buildings and their buildings, the Sanaa buildings. But then you see a number of other things on the way. To me was, I mean, as I said, extraordinarily shocking to see the film, because Nishizawa basically became an incredible sort of a person to see on screen. I think I mentioned to you, I had interviewed him 4 or 5 times, and he was quite opaque in general. And then suddenly you see that in the film. I don't know whether you discover that earlier on, but basically he takes over. He's really or whether the camera basically was the trick to make him sort of a larger-than-life person. But he definitely structures the film.
Let's say that this film was the first one in which we broke a rule we defined initially working together, was to never have architects in our films.
Right.
We were shooting films in interesting places of architecture, but we never wanted the figure or the speech of the expert. Neither architects nor critics nor journalists or let's say owners or whatever. So, but this film was made because of sort of friendship. So we really wanted to approach, and that was the first of a series. And now, actually, maybe we are doing a film with Smiljan in these days. So we meet next time with this film. The idea was to open also another way of introducing architects on screen, not like in a didactic way, as Ila was saying, showing a project after project in a chronological way to explain concept and forms in a rational way, but to explore a more intimate territory, which is, in this case, was very much a sort of emotional geography of the city of Tokyo through points of emotions, places he liked or was connected to, either by childhood memories or because of places he was inspired by. And so we go through the mega city of Tokyo in his beautiful, very small Alfa Romeo, which becomes a character as well in the film, which is the second main character. And through this very intimate setting of a car, we go through the monster of the city of Tokyo and go to very specific places, which are the ones that awakes like memories and thoughts.
Right, but so you'd say basically that rather than the promise of seeing some of the things they had actually done, Sanaa, I mean Nishizawa and Sejima, you were interested in having him as a guide to see Tokyo.
Yeah,
because there's something quite interesting. I mean, of course, the analogy, you must have heard it before, but the two sort of legendary films on Japan by Westerners from the 80s, Sans Soleil by Chris Marker and Tokyo Ga by Wim Wenders.
Yes.
In Tokyo Ga, it's actually quite interesting that it's a filmmaker who goes in to see the collaborators of Yasujiro Ozu, the legendary filmmaker, and he follows the actors and the collaborators, but then through them he makes a film on Japan.
Yes, sure.
I think something of that kind happens with your film too, that basically you go to Nishizawa architects who go and talk to architects, although that was not the rule, but then it becomes a true sort of symphony of the city. It is a film on Tokyo.
Yeah, very much. I think the main aim or objective of the film was very much to talk about the city, but through the eyes and through the itineraries and places that Nishizawa would bring us. So it's not a film about Tokyo in general. It's really about this emotional geography of him. And this is something we also developed later on with other architects. In Bangkok, for instance, we did the same with Bunsam Premtada. We did a film in Mumbai with Bijoy Jain,
right.
Similarly, with the same idea. And each time it's extremely interesting to see what an architect would put forward as, not only inspiring sites or places, but also what it looks like in a city. And to bring the architect out of the studio.
Right.
Yeah, what is interesting about the relationship about an architect and the city that he knows is very interesting because it's a kind of knowledge through a reading of the space, and that's what we are interested in.
Right.
And so it's a way to understand a lot about a city. Just going in some places that are very important, emotionally important for the architect, because the architects, the good architects, they think about space. They have 24 hours a day. They think about space. They are thinking how the space function, how the relation. And when the scale of a house of a building, you can understand it. But when is blown out and the scale of a city is complicated even to make a film is very complicated. To make a film about a city because you want to have a whole idea, no? And we want to understand everything about the city, but it's impossible. So the lecture, the reading of the city through some spaces, something that you put together, gives you an emotional geography, as Luis said, and that's very interesting because you have an idea of when you see Tokyo through the eyes of the Nishizawa and through also the car, it becomes really a kind of cartography, emotional.
But it's not only. I would say that we are not interested only in showing buildings. For instance, also in this film, from the Moriyama house, we try to zoom out to the neighborhood, and to the neighborhood we show you not only buildings, different typologies, but also how the inhabitant behaves, the rhythm of the neighborhood, or the objects they collect, and so all these elements of different scales, from the large one to the smallest one, is interesting to understand what makes a city. And it is not only infrastructure; it's also the mood, the way you move, the way you project yourself on your facade with little objects, the flowers, all the decorative aspect of it, and all these practices of invading space, of urban space, is.
Right. I must say that's actually what I really appreciate about the film. That despite the fact that the house was designed very tightly as a design and very calculated, what you see in the film is really its effects. The house appears as a frame, and you really see the life, and then the life expands onto the city.
But
I think it's time for.
Maybe it's interesting because to talk about effects, Moriyama-san, unfortunately we didn't keep that moment in the film, but at once he confessed that he changed the type of music he listened to since he lives there. Noise music was not a music he would listen before in his previous house. But this house and the basement, suddenly he thought, here, I should listen to noise music. And it's interesting because somehow, and I think we perceive this, how much Moriyama-san is attentive to to find the right match, you know, to find a sort of note of harmony between where he stands, how he stands, and what he does. And we see him for the reading sequence. He reads poetry in a place, philosophy in another one. He reads essays in another angle, and try to find also the right moment of the day with the right light and the wind. And so he doesn't only read the text, he reads the text with a moving curtain. And I think his experience of the text is 50% of it, and the other elements are the other 50%. And this is so interesting. I think this film was a bit of a turning point for us in the way we could understand these very subtle elements of understanding spatiality and how we are fully impacted by it. And since this film, we developed that way of listening much more. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. I think, yeah, now we can open it up to questions. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much for the film and this conversation. I do have one question expanding on what Enrique said about the house being the frame. So there is this concept in architecture which Tafuri talks about the sphere and the labyrinth. There is this part of architecture that it's big, it's monumental, and it's very orderly, it has an order. And there is this antithesis, which would be the labyrinth, where which is a labyrinth. You don't really know where you are. And I felt, I don't know if this was a conscious choice. I don't know how much editing did you left out from what you did, but that we are always receiving parts of the house, these fragments of situations, and it's very difficult to make it coherent, I don't know, how do you say coherente? Coherent? Okay. In your mind, spatially, formally. That's something I really liked that sensation, because it makes it feel even though the building is limited, it's finite, it feels it's always giving you something more. I don't know if you could say something about that decision of how to film the building without ever giving maybe a clear image about its entirety, and maybe thinking about it in little spaces which give very distinct sensations.
I think we evoked it before a little bit. For us, we try to make films with a high sense of presence, of being present here, really in the here and now, in the sense that filmmaking is a tool to manipulate time in a very plastic way. You could jump from past and future and present in constant in the editing. But we try very consciously to make films which are deeply rooted in the pure moment of the present, and be quite truthful to this. Because the question of spatiality is profoundly defined by your physical position of where you are as a conscious and as a perceptive presence. So the idea was, in this fragmentation, is always based on a very specific place. So, for instance, in the room or in the garden or in the basement. So there is this idea of just giving little illumination of present time, like just what happened in this very moment, in this precise quality of time we share. And so, yes, I think because it relates very much of how you as a visitor of a house, you would discover space. You don't have, I think, if you place yourself as a visitor, you don't have right away a clear idea of how the space is built and organized, etc. And we like this idea that cinema could recreate or give you that sensation of being in this excitement of discovery, and you don't have everything like clearly on view right away. It's bit by bit yet that you understand the quality of the spaces and what also it brings in the quality of the relationship, bit by bit. And so the film we conceive it as a full experience, so you would understand the house by watching the entire film. But you would understand it as a physical experience, as a psychological experience, but not as an architect who needs very clear floor plans and details about it. So yeah, there was a very clear desire from us to avoid giving you the right tools to understand it in a rational way, but to keep you in the bodily experience of the visitor, of saying, okay, I'm in the entrance hall. This is where I am now. I'm just like God watching the entire building at once.
I think yeah, I will just add something. I make a difference between a space and a project. Project in the sense many spaces put in together in a logic. There's a rationality of many spaces. And when you study architecture, I study architecture, and when you study architecture for several years, someone is teaching you how to put together spaces, but not what is the space is and what is the relationship that we can have with the space. So we need, when we are architects, we need to understand how the spaces are together. And something that we are completely against is what we call the drone syndrome. The drone syndrome for us is using a drone, and a drone is a fantastic way to understand everything in just one shot. You put a drone. If we had we know very well, because if we start this film with a drone, then from outside, even maybe arriving a little bit descending like this, that everything is done. So you have understood the project, and you can say, okay, now I watch the film, I know everything. So this is not what we want. We want, as Luis said, we want to understand what is the space. But the space, you don't need to understand what is the relationship with all the other space. It's a space. So when you go inside, you feel yourself the space, and you understand what is happening, no? And this, all the films we made are fragmented for this, just to at the end of the film having someone that is saying, I'm a little bit confused, and for us it's a good thing. Maybe we did it because why we want to people get confused about the project, because this is not the aim. We don't make films about a building. It's not this. So otherwise we put a drone as is done in. But we work through other things. We work through an emotional relationship to a space. So we need people, and we meet people, and we never talk about space with these people. We never ask something about space. We never ask something about architecture. We are not interested in this, because we think that our body is like it belongs to space, and as space belongs to the body. So when you enter a space, the space enters you. This is Palasma that say this. And it means that like sound, is not watching an image, but sound, you are in the sound, you are in the space. Sound is fantastic to understand how a space works, because sound goes everywhere, even outside the space. So that's what we are looking for. We are looking for to understand how it's happening. So we need people. We talk with them about how they live. And so you have to understand what you want, and you have. If you want to understand how this house works, you have some elements. You put it together. You understand everything or nothing. Is not a problem. But what we want to understand is how we can live better in a place. How we can pay attention. But this is a case that Luis said is the first film where we really found someone that is living like this and understood how it's important to have a relation with space. But after that, we made a lot of other films to understand how a space also can become also very negative in a sense. This is a positive way. But what is much more interesting is to analyze how a space can be problematic for us. Like, for example, I can give you some example, but we don't never pay attention. But entering an hospital, for example, is terrible. I don't know in Chile, but everywhere, in Italy, in France, when you go in a hospital, it's not really a place that you want to go inside. No, not because you are sick. It's because of the space they created. There's a space of a hospital is terrible. If you go, you don't have any problem. You go in a hospital and stay for 1 day, 3 days, 4 days. You go out, you are sick. So it's not a place to be here. No. But it's not only that. There's also, we just arrived yesterday with a plane. If you see what the airports are today, is terrible. No, you have to go to take a plane. You are in a supermarket. You have to pass, and you are obliged to do it. No, because they don't give you a choice to not do it. You pass through a supermarket. It's a kind of it's super violent, no? But even the city, going outside in the city, when you watch the city today, starting from the industrial city, because the city has been made from that moment more for cars than for people. It's not a place for us, no. It's not a place for. It's very, very small places are for work, for people, for relations, for having a good relationship with the others. But normally is terrible, no. It's just you take a car because you are so fragile, no. You're fragile. You put yourself in the car. So all the spaces are made it with an intention. So, and I think in watching Moriyama is the starting point to understand that we have to be very, very sensible to this, and to understand that when you go outside, if even in your house, you can be much better than where you are. But when you go outside, we have to be ready to analyze the space that we live in. And it's like and also say and tell. We need an education to space. We need an education, all of us. We need to be educated, but not like architects, because an architect is educated to create space for most of the time for a client. But we need to be educated to ask for good spaces for us. To, as I say, Enrique Lefebvre, the right to the city, no, le droit à la ville. He said we need to ask spaces for us as we want, as we need, as we otherwise someone else will decide how to make these spaces. No, and someone else is making the cities for us. Someone else is making the hospitals. Someone else is making the prisons. No, all these spaces. They created to control, and even the wars. No, I'm going very far from the topics, but it's very interesting. Why you make wars? You make wars to take space. It's a space topic. The war is made only for space. When we understand this, we say, wow, we have to be much more attentive with the space. What is our relationship? Because we talk about the relation of space without knowing what is it. But when you understand that there are many people dying because they want to keep their space, it's just a question of space.
I think.
Estamos listos, los invitamos a continuar esta conversación con una copa de vino en el jardín. Un aplauso grande para la Beka y Luis Lemoine.